What if I told you the peace you've been searching for isn't waiting on the other side of a perfect plan? It's hiding in the mess you're trying so hard to fix. What if the life you're meant to live only begins the moment you stop needing all the answers? We spend years gripping tightly to control, trying to force clarity, avoid pain, and predict every next step. But in doing so, we suffocate the very joy we're longing for. Because here's the truth: you don't need to know what's next. You only need to learn how to stay open when you don't. This isn't just another story. It's a map back to yourself, to trust, to courage, to a quieter kind of strength. And if you've been tired lately, not just in your body, but in your soul, then what you're about to hear might be the permission your heart has been waiting for. So if that speaks to something deep inside you, click subscribe now, because the journey you're about to take might just change how you see everything. Part 1, The Illusion of Control, Why We Suffer When We Resist. Eleonora hadn't meant to cry at work. She was the calm one, the capable one, the one everyone leaned on when things went sideways. After 2 decades as a crisis counselor in Brooklyn, she had learned how to hold space for trauma, for chaos, for grief. She had been the steady breath in the room when mothers collapsed over lost sons, when teens whispered suicidal thoughts between trembling lips, when cops arrived too late and someone had to sit with the shattered pieces. But this morning, it was a spilled cup of coffee that undid her. She'd been reaching for the phone with her left hand, trying to balance a too-full schedule on her right, her mind already 5 steps ahead. Client notes to finish, a report due by noon, a meeting she'd promised to lead. Then, just as she shifted her weight to grab her mug, her elbow nudged the edge. Coffee arced through the air in slow motion, like a dancer falling from grace. It hit her papers, her sweater, the floor. A brown, bitter splash across her order, her structure, her carefully arranged world. And just like that, she broke. She dropped to the floor with a gasp, gripping a handful of napkins, heart racing, and suddenly she was weeping. Not the soft, apologetic kind of crying people politely pretend not to notice. This was grief crying, guttural, uncontrolled, the kind that sounds like it belongs to someone else, someone wounded. She didn't know what hurt more, the coffee or the illusion that she was still okay. The thing about breakdowns is they rarely announce themselves. They show up dressed as ordinary moments: a late email, a silent phone, a traffic jam, or a cup of coffee tipped over at 8:47 a.m. in a place where you're supposed to be composed. But the truth is, Eleonora had been unraveling for months. She'd just been too busy controlling everything to notice. Her supervisor knocked lightly on the door. "Hey, you okay?" Eleonora looked up from the floor. Her mascara was smudged. The napkins had done nothing, and for once she didn't have a good answer. "No," she said softly, "I don't think I am." That night she didn't go home. She turned off her phone, told no one, and drove until the city lights disappeared. Past Yonkers, past Cold Spring, past anything familiar. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. Only that she needed to be somewhere she didn't have to be anyone. By the time the sun began to rise, she was in Sedona, Arizona. She had never been before, but something about the red rocks and the endless sky felt like it might hold the silence she craved. It felt like a place where she might finally let go. The first thing Eleonora noticed when she stepped out of the car was the silence. It wasn't the absence of sound, it was something else. A kind of presence, as if the land itself was listening. Watching, breathing. She stood there, wind in her hair, red dust clinging to her boots, and for the first time in years, no one needed anything from her. No ringing phone, no inbox, no one crying at 2 a.m. asking her to fix what couldn't be fixed. Just cliffs and clouds, just the vast indifference of the canyon. It was terrifying and it was holy. She rented a modest room at a retreat center nestled between two mesas. No TV, no reception, just a bed, a window, and a wooden chair that creaked when she sat. That first night, she stared at the ceiling in the dark, mind racing. She thought about the patients she left behind, about her unfinished paperwork, about whether the team could survive without her. But the canyon didn't care. The canyon didn't know her credentials. It didn't know how many hours she worked last week. It didn't care if she was always the strong one. The canyon didn't need her to prove her worth, and for once neither did she. The next morning, a small paper was slid under her door, a schedule of optional activities, hikes, meditation. A group circle called the sand ceremony. She didn't plan to attend anything, but something about the word ceremony tugged at her. She had spent her whole life in service of others, healing. Maybe it was time to honor her own. So at sunset, she walked toward a narrow trail that led deep into the rocks, following the last glimmers of golden light. And there, surrounded by strangers and silence, she was handed a small bowl of red sand and a piece of paper. "Write down what you're ready to release," the guide said, "then carry it." Eleonora stared at the blank page. What was she ready to release? She thought about writing something poetic, something safe, something surface level, but her hand moved differently. Her pen scrawled across the page in all caps. "I'm tired of holding everything together." She blinked, surprised by her own honesty. When it came time, she walked slowly to the edge of a small cliff, held the bowl in her palm, and let the paper flutter into the canyon below. Then, with trembling fingers, she poured the sand out into the wind. She didn't feel immediate peace. There were no fireworks, no mystical epiphany, just a breath, just space. And for the first time in a long, long while, no urge to fix anything. In that canyon, Eleonora understood something. Control wasn't the answer. It was the weight she needed to lay down. Back home in New York, Eleonora had a reputation. "She's unshakable," her colleagues used to say. The calm in the storm. And it was true. She had trained herself to be the one who always knew what to do. She kept spreadsheets of emergency contacts, checklists for every disaster, even backup shoes under her desk. No detail escaped her. No chaos she couldn't contain. It made her successful. It made her reliable. It made her needed. But what no one saw, what even she refused to admit, was the price she was paying. Because control doesn't come free. It costs time. Energy, sleep, sanity. It costs presence. Most of us don't chase control because we're power-hungry. We chase it because we're afraid. Afraid that if we let go for even a second, the whole thing will fall apart. Afraid that if we stop being perfect, we'll stop being loved. That if we stop fixing, we'll stop mattering. That if we don't know what's next, we'll be crushed by what we don't see coming. So we grasp, we micromanage, we overthink, we white-knuckle our way through relationships, jobs, identities, trying to hold it all in place. And for a while it works. We stay on schedule, we meet expectations, we keep up appearances, but beneath the surface, there's tension, tiredness, loneliness, because control may protect us from uncertainty, but it also isolates us from life. Eleonora had always mistaken control for competence, but that wasn't the full truth. The deeper truth? Control was her armor. It kept her from feeling the full weight of grief. It kept her from facing the question she'd avoided for years. Who am I if I'm not saving someone? That night in the canyon, after the sand ceremony, she sat under the stars wrapped in a borrowed blanket. And for the first time, she whispered a prayer, not for clarity, not for strength, but for freedom. Freedom from the belief that she had to hold everything together. Freedom from the fear that letting go meant losing herself. Freedom from the idea that being worthy meant being in control. She didn't have answers. But for once, she didn't need them. She just needed rest. Eleonora woke up before dawn to the sound of birdsong and her own breath, shaky, shallow, and uneven. She had dreamed she was drowning. In the dream, she was in a room with no doors, holding a broken window shut while water surged in through the cracks. She screamed for help, but no sound came. Just the rush of water rising to her chin, to her lips, to her eyes, and the unbearable pressure of holding it all in. She sat up in bed, heart pounding. Her hands were trembling. She hadn't had that dream since she was 17. It's strange how the body keeps score, even when we push things out of our minds. The grief, the fear, the panic. Our bodies remember. They carry tension in the jaw, a heaviness in the chest, a stomach that won't settle, shoulders that rise like shields. We think we're managing just fine, but our nervous system knows better. In her years of counseling trauma survivors, Eleonora had often told clients, "You're not broken. You're responding to something that overwhelmed you." But she had never applied that same compassion to herself. She had thought she was stronger than her past. That control was the antidote to chaos. That if she planned well enough, she'd never feel powerless again. But here she was, on a borrowed mattress in Arizona, unable to stop her hands from shaking. Her body, not her brain, was finally telling the truth. Later that morning, she joined a gentle movement class. Nothing strenuous, just slow stretches on the red clay floor, the scent of sage hanging in the air. As she moved, something cracked inside her. Not a bone, not a muscle, a memory. She remembered being 6 years old, curled in a laundry basket, listening to her parents argue through the walls. She remembered thinking it was her job to fix it. That if she was good enough, quiet enough, helpful enough, they would stop yelling. That belief had grown up with her. It had dressed itself in professional clothes, in polished language, in degrees and credentials. But underneath, it was still the same. If I don't hold it all together, everything will fall apart. Except now, she was learning how to let go, not all at once, not dramatically, but breath by breath, every time she exhaled fully, every time she didn't rush to solve, every time she let the moment be exactly what it was. She reclaimed a part of herself that didn't need control to feel safe. She wasn't healed, not yet, but she was finally here in her body, in her breath, in her life. Eleonora sat on the edge of a cliff the next evening, knees hugged to her chest, watching the sun drip gold across the jagged horizon. The wind moved her hair gently, like an old friend trying to soothe her. Below, a raven rode the air, wings outstretched, gliding, not flapping, not resisting. That bird wasn't working to stay afloat. It was cooperating with the invisible. She whispered aloud, half to herself, "Letting go isn't the same as giving up. We are taught that surrender is weakness, that letting go means losing, that to rest is to fall behind, that to stop controlling is to fail. But the truth is, letting go is a different kind of courage. It's trusting life even when you don't understand it. It's loosening your grip when every instinct tells you to hold on tighter. It's saying, I don't know what happens next and I'll meet it anyway. Letting go is not resignation, it's participation, a brave willingness to be with what is, instead of always chasing what should be. At the retreat, one of the facilitators had shared a quote from a Buddhist monk. "You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf." Eleonora hadn't paid much attention when she first heard it. But now, as she watched the light fade into lavender across the rocks, it clicked. All her life, she'd tried to dam the waves, build walls, raise barriers, prepare for the impact. But the ocean didn't work that way. Neither did life. Neither did healing. You can't control the tides, but you can learn to float. You can move with the current instead of fighting it. She picked up a small stone, rubbed its surface between her fingers, and thought about the stories she'd clung to. I have to be strong, I can't fall apart. If I don't fix this, no one will. Each one had felt like a truth, but maybe they were just survival tools. Maybe they were ready to be set down. Letting go didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean pretending nothing hurt. It meant making space for something new to begin. Eleonora took a deep breath and whispered something no one had ever told her. "You've done enough. You can rest now." The tears came quietly. Not from grief this time, but from relief. In the days that followed, Eleonora stopped making to-do lists. She didn't need a schedule to tell her how to be present. She spent her mornings walking barefoot through wild sagebrush, letting the cool earth remind her of something ancient. She listened to the wind and birds more than she listened to her thoughts. She joined a pottery session, even though she'd never touched clay in her life. Her hands trembled at first. Years of perfectionism made it hard to accept the mess. But as the wheel turned and the clay spun wild and lopsided beneath her fingers, she laughed. Not because it looked good, but because for once she wasn't trying to control the outcome. It was enough to feel something again. Joy, awe, stillness. Because when we stop controlling, we begin experiencing. The meal tastes better, the song sounds sweeter, the tears fall more freely, and the moment feels more alive. Control may give us the illusion of safety, but presence gives us something better. Aliveness. And that's what Eleonora had missed the most. Not certainty, not stability, but aliveness. Eleonora didn't become a different person overnight. She didn't burn her degrees or quit her job or move to the mountains. But when she returned home, something had shifted. She started leaving work earlier without guilt. She let others take the lead sometimes, even if it meant mistakes. She paused more. She breathed deeper. She didn't answer every phone call immediately. She didn't feel the need to hold space for everyone all the time. She realized her worth wasn't tied to her usefulness. She began rebuilding her life not around control, but around connection. With herself, with the people she loved, with the present moment. And the most surprising thing, nothing fell apart. The world didn't collapse because she took a breath. In fact, it grew more beautiful. Maybe you see yourself in Eleonora. Maybe you're the one who always shows up, always fixes, always plans 5 steps ahead. Maybe you've been living with clenched fists and tight shoulders for so long, you've forgotten what it feels like to trust the wind. Let this be your reminder. You are allowed to stop holding everything together. You are allowed to not know what's next. You are allowed to soften. The sky does not fall when you rest, and you are not lost because you let go. You are becoming exactly who you were meant to be without the weight. So let go, not because life is certain, but because it never was, and because your soul is ready to breathe again. You don't need control to be whole. You only need the courage to be here. If this story touched something inside you, subscribe to the channel. More stories like this are coming, about healing, awakening, and returning to your truest self. And remember, you are not alone in this. You were never meant to carry it all. Let go. Come home. There's a moment in life, not loud, not cinematic, when everything you once believed would hold simply doesn't. You reach for what used to give you stability. Your job, your relationship, your plans, your faith in how the world should be. And find only air, like a foot landing on the last step of a staircase that isn't there. That's the moment when the floor disappears. Not because you've failed, not because something went wrong, but because life, in its terrifying honesty, just doesn't promise ground. This was where Eleonora found herself again, a few weeks after returning home. Not in the desert anymore, but in her own kitchen, her hand on the sink, her phone buzzing with another message from someone needing something. She had rested. She had let go, but life had resumed. Deadlines, decisions, demands. And in the middle of it all, the question rose again, familiar now, but still sharp. What do I hold on to when nothing feels solid anymore? That question isn't new. It lives in every divorce, in every diagnosis, in every quiet cry when the world keeps spinning but your inner world has shattered. It lives in the space between the life you had and the life you don't yet know how to live. This is the space of groundlessness, and as brutal as it feels, it's where real transformation begins. We don't just fear uncertainty, we fear what it says about us. That we're failing, that we're falling behind. That others have something figured out we don't. We scroll through curated lives and mistake them for stability. But the truth? No one really knows. Everyone is guessing, hoping, pretending. Everyone is walking on invisible threads they pray won't snap. And yet we suffer, because we think we're the only ones unsure. Eleonora began to notice how often people said I'm fine with a smile that didn't reach their eyes. How often strength was performed, not lived. How uncertainty had become taboo, something to hide rather than something to hold. But in the canyon, under starlight, in broken sleep and sacred silence, she had learned this. Uncertainty isn't weakness, it's the birthplace of everything true. There's a word in Tibetan Buddhism, bardo. It means in between, the space after one thing ends but before another begins. Most people only talk about bardos in relation to death. But the truth is, we live in bardos all the time. The moment after the breakup but before the healing. The pause between losing a job and finding a new path. The silence after a diagnosis when nothing is certain anymore. We hate this space. We rush to escape it. We try to fill it with noise, plans, reassurances. But what if, just for a moment, we stopped running? Eleonora began to see this bardo not as a punishment, but as an invitation. An invitation to pause, to listen, to let the grief rise, not to destroy, but to clear the way. When everything falls away, you get to ask, what's truly mine? What do I believe? What do I want to carry forward? The answers don't come fast, they don't come pretty, but they come. And they come only when we're willing to stand still in the unknown. Surrender sounds passive. But real surrender, the kind that frees your soul, is anything but weak. It is active acceptance. It's the moment you stop demanding that the river flow upstream. It's when you stop yelling at the wind for changing directions. It's the moment you unclench your fists, not because you've given up, but because you've finally realized holding on is costing you too much. Eleonora sat on her porch during a thunderstorm, rain cascading from the roof like a waterfall. She thought of all the years she tried to plan the pain out of her life, all the hours spent predicting, preparing, preventing. But here, now, there was nothing to do, just the sound of the sky falling, and the quiet voice within whispering, "You're safe even if you don't know what's next." Surrender isn't about defeat, it's about alignment. You stop resisting reality, and reality in return gives you peace. Stillness is a space of radical presence. When the noise stops, the fear speaks, the longing emerges, the truth surfaces. Most of us avoid stillness not because we're too busy, but because we're afraid of what we might hear in the quiet. But in her stillness, Eleonora discovered something unexpected. Her intuition began to speak again, not in words, but in knowing. A deep cellular wisdom that said, "Turn here, wait a little longer, you don't need to prove anything, rest." She started to realize she didn't need all the answers right now. She only needed to follow the next true step. Groundlessness can feel isolating. It seems like everyone else is sprinting while you're crawling. Like everyone else has certainty while you sit with questions. But what if we normalize this space? What if the truth wasn't you're behind, but you're exactly where you need to be? Eleonora began opening up to others, gently. She stopped pretending she had it all together. She admitted her fears without dressing them in humor or logic. And in doing so, something magical happened. Others began to open up too. Not in dramatic confessions, but in soft truths. I feel that too. I don't know either. I'm scared sometimes. The groundless space became shared space, and that made all the difference. Eventually, you begin again, but not with the old rules. You don't rebuild based on fear. You don't chase validation. You ask, what makes me feel alive? What do I value now? What kind of life feels honest? Eleonora started small. She rearranged her apartment, not for aesthetics, but for ease. She unsubscribed from emails that didn't nourish her. She began working fewer hours, not out of rebellion, but alignment. She said yes to less, and no to what once kept her numb. And slowly, without forcing anything, a new life began to take shape, one built not on control, but on clarity. This is the paradox. The moment you stop needing ground beneath your feet, you realize you can fly. Not always gracefully, not always confidently, but flight doesn't require perfection, only permission. So here's yours, permission to not know, to not have a plan, to start again with nothing but your breath and a heartbeat. Because the groundless truth is this: you are stronger than the storm, you are braver than the unknown, and you are more whole than you've ever been told. So when life dissolves under your feet, breathe, pause, listen, let the old fall. Let the new come unannounced, and meet it not with fear, but with wonder. We've been sold a lie, that if we do all the right things, follow the steps, manifest the outcomes, maintain the positive mindset, life will get easier. That one day we'll wake up, and everything will feel light, smooth, simple. But what if the goal was never ease? What if growth was supposed to stretch us, break us open, burn away what's false, so something real can grow? Eleonora once believed the point of healing was to feel better. Now she understood the point of healing is to feel more. There's a story we tell ourselves, maybe without realizing it. It goes something like this: if I do the work, if I heal, if I stay positive, then life will reward me with ease. We don't say it out loud, but it lives under the surface of our expectations. That if we eat right, meditate, go to therapy, then the chaos will stop, the triggers will disappear, the pain will finally end. But Eleonora had learned something different. Pain doesn't disappear when you evolve, it transforms, it refines. It becomes part of your wisdom. Real healing doesn't make life easy. It makes you capable of facing life as it is. She remembered a moment not long after the retreat, standing in line at the grocery store behind a crying child. The mother looked exhausted. Other people stared, annoyed. Eleonora felt something old rise up. The tightness, the judgment, the desire to escape. But this time she didn't. She breathed, she softened. She saw the mother, really saw her. And instead of judging, she smiled. It was small, it was quiet, but it was growth. Growth she had earned not through ease, but through her willingness to sit in discomfort and let it teach her. We romanticize comfort. We chase it like it's the point of being alive, but comfort is sneaky. It doesn't only soothe, it shrinks, it whispers. Don't try that, it's risky. Don't say that, they'll judge you. Don't feel that, it's too much. And over time, comfort doesn't feel like peace anymore. It feels like numbness. Eleonora had lived in that numbness for years, going through motions, staying busy, avoiding silence. Her life looked good on the outside. But inside, she was starving for aliveness. It wasn't until she faced the discomfort of stillness, of grief, of uncertainty, of being fully seen, that she realized, I wasn't broken. I was just hiding too long in places that kept me safe but small. True freedom isn't found in comfort. It's found in your ability to be with discomfort and remain present, kind, and true anyway. Eleonora began to treat discomfort differently, not as something to escape, but as a message, a tight chest, a sign she was abandoning herself in a conversation. Irritability, maybe a boundary was being crossed, restlessness, a soul nudging her toward change. We're taught to mute these signals, push through, be strong, don't be so sensitive, but the body doesn't lie. It tells you when something is off. When you've betrayed a truth. When something sacred inside is calling for your attention. Discomfort, she journaled one night, is not danger, it's guidance. When she started listening, her whole world softened, not because it got easier, but because she got real. Discomfort is like weather. It changes, moves, passes. But most of us react as if every storm is permanent. A moment of sadness becomes I'm broken. A few days of anxiety become I'm failing. A fight becomes I'm not lovable. But Eleonora began practicing a new way of being. Let it rain, let it burn, let it tremble. And remind yourself this is weather, not identity. There was power in simply naming what she felt. I'm angry, I'm ashamed, I'm afraid. Naming was grounding, naming was enough. She didn't need to solve every feeling. She only needed to stay, to not run, to not abandon herself. That choice, to remain with what was real, became the beginning of self-respect. Discomfort strips away illusions. It burns off who you're pretending to be, so you can meet who you really are. It's in the fire of heartbreak, of failure, of grief, that your real self rises, raw, honest, unpolished. Eleonora had once hated her vulnerability. Now it was her compass. Pain wasn't her enemy, it was a threshold, a passage, and each time she walked through it, each time she didn't numb, flee, or fake it, she emerged clearer, not happier, but truer. And truth, she discovered, is a kind of joy deeper than any high. One of the greatest discomforts in life is accepting that not everything can be fixed. Not every person, not every memory, not every misunderstanding. Eleonora used to be a fixer. She wanted everyone to be okay, especially her. She thought peace meant solving every issue. But peace isn't found in control. Peace is found in releasing the need to fix what was never yours to carry. She stopped trying to make her past make sense. She stopped over-explaining her choices. She stopped waiting for closure from people who'd already left. Instead, she made space for her own messy, beautiful human experience. To simply exist without a solution. Some things don't need healing, they need witnessing. At some point, discomfort stopped feeling like a threat. It became sacred. Eleonora started lighting candles at night, not for ambience, but as a reminder she could be with her shadows. She stopped skipping the parts of herself that felt hard to love. She made tea for her anxiety. She wrapped a blanket around her grief. She kissed the forehead of her anger. It sounds strange, but it changed her life. Because when you stop fighting your pain, you stop fighting yourself. Discomfort became her teacher, her gateway into deeper compassion, deeper presence, deeper faith. She didn't rise above pain. She learned how to walk with it, and that made her unshakable. If there's one thing Eleonora would say now to her past self, it's this. Stop choosing what's easy. Start choosing what's honest. Easy numbs, honest heals. Easy avoids, honest transforms. The path of growth isn't paved with comfort. It's carved through courage. Every time you stay with your feelings instead of fleeing, you reclaim a piece of your power. Every time you tell the truth, even when it shakes, you come home to your worth. This is the art of discomfort. Not tolerating pain just to suffer, but meeting pain as a doorway to meaning, to maturity, to self-love. So the next time life invites you into something uncomfortable, don't run, lean in. There's treasure in the tension. And the person you're becoming is waiting, just on the other side. If this touched you, subscribe to the channel. More stories, more reflections, more sacred truth-telling is waiting for you. You don't have to walk this alone. Eleonora didn't see it at first. How the faces changed, but the patterns stayed the same. Different partners, different jobs, different friendships, but the same ache, the same feeling of being unseen, unheard, unworthy. It was like walking into a new room and finding the same old wound waiting on the couch. At first, she thought it was just bad luck, then maybe bad choices, but the truth was far more intimate. The pain you don't face becomes the script you keep living, not because you're broken, but because the psyche is wired to recreate what's unresolved, not to punish you, but to give you another chance to choose differently, to see it clearly, to heal it consciously, to respond with love where before you only knew survival. People mirror us, not just our joy or generosity, but our hidden wounds, our unmet needs, our buried beliefs. If you believe you're not worthy, you'll find someone who makes you prove your value. If you fear abandonment, you'll be drawn to those who are emotionally unavailable. If you carry guilt, you'll end up in dynamics where you're always the one apologizing, even when you've done nothing wrong. It's not fate, it's not the universe being cruel. It's your subconscious seeking to resolve what your conscious self hasn't yet healed. Eleonora saw this clearly in her relationships. She kept attracting people who were emotionally distant. Kind at first, charming even, but when it came time to go deeper, they disappeared, and each time she thought, "What's wrong with me?" But when she looked closer, she realized they weren't the problem, they were mirrors, showing her the part of herself that still feared being fully known, still believed she had to earn love by being useful, agreeable, perfect. You can't outrun the mirror, but you can choose to look into it with compassion. Beneath the repeated pain are the stories we've carried since childhood. Eleonora's story? If I speak my truth, I'll be rejected. It wasn't something she consciously thought, but it lived in her nervous system. A belief born from moments too small to notice at the time. A parent dismissing her tears. A teacher calling her too sensitive. A first love mocking her vulnerability. These moments form emotional blueprints. And without awareness, we build entire lives on them. That's why we end up in loops, attracting the same type of boss, falling for the same kind of partner, ending friendships that feel strangely like the last ones. Until you rewrite the script she wrote in her journal, you will keep casting people to play old roles. The stories we carry aren't our fault, but healing them is our responsibility. Most people misunderstand trauma. They think it's the event, the breakup, the accident, the betrayal. But trauma is not what happened. Trauma is what happens inside you as a result of what happened. It's the beliefs you form, the feelings you suppress, the truths you abandon. And unless that inner response is healed, you will live from it. You'll build boundaries not from self-worth, but from fear. You'll love with half a heart, because the other half is still hiding from what it remembers. Eleonora stopped asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and started asking, "What belief did I inherit from this? What truth did I lose? What part of me needs to be welcomed back?" That shift changed everything. Because she realized she wasn't broken, she was protecting herself. And healing wasn't about fixing. It was about creating safety for the part of her still holding the pain. Why do we repeat? Because repetition is the soul's way of asking for attention. The same fight in a relationship, the same job that drains you, the same shame after setting boundaries. These are not failures, they are opportunities. Each repetition gives you another chance to show up differently, with presence instead of panic, with honesty instead of appeasement, with boundaries instead of people-pleasing. Eleonora had one of these moments when she got into a heated argument with a friend. In the past, she would have apologized quickly just to keep the peace. But this time she paused, she sat with the discomfort, and she spoke, "I love you, but I need to tell the truth even if it risks losing you." The silence after was terrifying. But it was also liberating, because she didn't abandon herself, and the friendship, instead of breaking, deepened. That's the magic of the mirror when you respond with new awareness. You stop repeating, you begin rewriting. Another loop many get stuck in is resentment. You replay what they did, how unfair it was, how they got away with it. But what you're really reliving is your own powerlessness. Forgiveness is not about condoning, it's about reclaiming. You forgive not because they deserve peace, but because you do. Forgiveness says, I refuse to let this pain define my future. I choose freedom over being right. I am more than what happened to me. Eleonora wrote a letter once, not to send, but to set herself free. To the one who betrayed her, to the one who left without goodbye, to the one who shamed her into silence. She wrote what she never got to say, then she burned it. Not because the past didn't matter, but because her future did. Forgiveness isn't a feeling. It's a decision you make again and again. And each time the wound loses a little more power. As Eleonora healed, her outer world began to shift. Not overnight, not dramatically, but subtly, deeply. She stopped attracting emotional avoiders because she was no longer avoiding herself. She stopped overgiving because she now knew her worth wasn't tied to being needed. She stopped explaining her boundaries because she trusted they were valid. And something beautiful happened. Her relationships got richer. Her friendships got safer. Her loneliness lessened, not because she had more people, but because she was finally with herself. Healing isn't selfish. It's the most generous act you can offer the people you love. Because when you stop bleeding on others, you stop repeating the pain that was once done to you. Eventually, the mirror stopped reflecting pain. It started reflecting peace. Because when you do the inner work, the world outside you changes. It becomes clearer, kinder, less threatening, not because everyone else got better, but because you did. You begin to see others not as enemies, but as fellow travelers, each carrying their own invisible bags. You begin to meet pain not with panic, but with presence. You begin to love not to get something, but because love is what you've become. Eleonora now walks through life with different eyes. When something triggers her, she asks, "What is this showing me about myself?" When something repeats, she whispers, "Thank you for the invitation to grow again." The mirror never stopped reflecting. She just stopped fearing what she saw. And that, more than any relationship, success, or spiritual insight, was the breakthrough she never knew she needed. Eleonora used to think boundaries were a wall, a defense. A no shouted into the silence, a cold way to push people away. She had avoided setting them for most of her life, terrified of being seen as mean, difficult, or selfish. She learned to smile when she wanted to cry, to say it's fine when it wasn't, to stay silent when everything in her body was begging her to speak. It was exhausting, and worse, it was lonely. Because when you abandon your truth to keep the peace, you don't actually create peace. You create quiet resentment, which eventually turns into distance, disconnection, and even rage. Here's what she eventually understood. A boundary is not a wall. It's a bridge to real connection, because real connection can't exist without truth, and boundaries are the way we speak our truth with love. Eleonora had spent years being the nice one, the one who always helped, always listened, always stayed a little longer even when her soul was tired. She wore her self-abandonment like a badge of honor, and the world applauded it, mistaking her people-pleasing for kindness. But inside, she was aching. She would walk away from conversations feeling drained, say yes while her inner voice screamed no, apologize for things that weren't her fault, and slowly her spirit dimmed. "I didn't lose myself all at once," she later wrote. "I lost myself one silent moment at a time." The truth is, being nice isn't always kind, because if it costs your well-being, Your voice, your boundaries. It's not kindness. It's self-betrayal. Most people think of boundaries as rejection. But boundaries, when rooted in self-respect, not control, are actually a profound expression of love. They say, I value this connection enough to be honest with you. I want to keep showing up with a full heart, not a resentful one. I trust you enough to let you see what I really need. Eleonora discovered this truth when she finally told her sister. I can't keep answering your calls late at night when I have work in the morning. I love you. I want to be there for you. But I also need to take care of my own rest. She was terrified of being misunderstood, afraid of being seen as cold. But what happened next surprised her. Her sister paused and then said, Thank you for being real. I never knew you felt that way. That was the beginning of a new kind of closeness between them. One built not on guilt, but on mutual respect. Here's the truth most people avoid. When you start setting boundaries, people will get uncomfortable, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're changing a pattern they benefited from. If you were always available, they got used to that. If you always agreed, they expected it. If you always put them first, they called it loyalty. So when you start saying no, when you start choosing you, you're not just making a new decision. You're disrupting an old dynamic. And it might create resistance. People might call you selfish. They might guilt you. They might pull away. But here's what Eleonora wrote in her journal: if someone leaves because I told the truth about what I need, they were never really seeing me anyway. They were seeing the version of me that kept them comfortable. You are not responsible for other people's reactions to your truth. You are only responsible for speaking it with compassion. We teach people how to treat us through what we accept, what we ignore, what we allow to repeat. Eleonora once had a friend who constantly interrupted her, talked over her, and only called when she needed something. At first, Eleonora let it slide, telling herself it wasn't worth a confrontation. But over time, she started to dread every interaction, until one day she calmly said, I value our friendship, but I feel dismissed when I'm constantly talked over. If we're going to keep growing this connection, I need us both to feel heard. It was awkward, it was vulnerable, but it was honest. Her friend got defensive at first, but later came back with a simple message. I never realized I was doing that. Thank you for telling me. I want to do better. Sometimes boundaries end relationships, but sometimes they deepen them. Because when someone knows the real you, your needs, your limits, your truths, they finally get the chance to love you in a way that's real. Eleonora didn't just set boundaries with people. She had to set them with her own habits. She realized she had been giving her time, energy, and attention to things that left her empty. Endless scrolling on social media. Saying yes to work projects out of fear, not alignment. Keeping up with friendships that had already expired. So she asked herself, what would it look like if I gave myself permission to protect my energy the same way I protect others? She stopped answering emails late at night. Stopped over-explaining her decisions. Stopped keeping herself busy just to avoid being alone. In the space she created, something beautiful happened. She wrote again. She moved her body with joy, not shame. She remembered what it felt like to hear her own voice. Boundaries, she realized, aren't just about protecting yourself from others. They're about protecting the life you're meant to live. One of the hardest truths Eleonora had to face was this. My inability to set boundaries wasn't a personality trait. It was a reflection of what I believed I was worth. For years, she had tolerated behavior that chipped away at her confidence, not because she didn't know it was wrong, but because a part of her questioned whether she deserved better. She stayed quiet, agreeable, flexible to the point of breaking. Until one afternoon, during a quiet walk through Golden Gate Park, she whispered to herself something she had never dared say. "I'm allowed to protect my peace, even if it disappoints someone else." That sentence changed everything, because when you stop tying your worth to how much you give, you start reclaiming your right to exist with boundaries. And that's when life begins to feel like your own again. Boundaries are not the end of love. They are the beginning of real love. Love that includes you, not just as a giver, a fixer, a listener, but as a full human being, with needs, limits, preferences, and sacred space. Eleonora now lives her life by one quiet rule: if it costs me my peace, it's too expensive. She doesn't say yes out of guilt anymore. She doesn't stay in rooms where her silence is more valued than her voice. She doesn't bend until she breaks. Instead, she builds bridges through honesty, clarity, and courage. And the most beautiful thing, she's never felt closer to the people who truly love her. Because when you honor your boundaries, you give others permission to honor theirs too. It creates a different kind of connection, one that's rooted in truth, not obligation, mutuality, not martyrdom. You are allowed to take up space, to say no without explaining, to ask for what you need, to be both kind and firm. Boundaries are not selfish. They are sacred acts of self-respect. So let this be your quiet revolution. Start choosing peace over pleasing. Start trusting that your needs matter. Start building bridges that lead you back to yourself. Because in that space, your real life begins. Adrian had always equated movement with meaning. His calendar was full, his inbox overflowing. There were no gaps in his schedule, no pauses between meetings, no real moments to simply breathe, and for a long time it worked. He got promotions. He was praised for his grind mindset. People called him driven, resilient, unstoppable. But at night, in the quiet moments between exhaustion and sleep, he could feel it. A deep ache, not in his body, but in his being. Why do I feel like I'm running and getting nowhere? Why does everything I achieve feel empty? What Adrian didn't realize then is something many of us are never taught. Rest is not the opposite of growth. Stillness is not the enemy of success. Sometimes stopping is the most forward-moving thing we can do. We live in a culture that glorifies momentum. Keep pushing, hustle harder, don't stop, sleep when you're dead. But here's the truth that rarely gets spoken. Constant movement is often a trauma response. It's how we avoid the discomfort of silence, the weight of emotion, the questions we're afraid to answer. When Adrian finally took a sabbatical, a forced one, after burnout landed him in the ER, he described it as terrifying, not because he was physically unwell, but because, for the first time, he had to sit with himself. No deadlines, no distractions, just the hum of his own heart. And in that terrifying quiet, something beautiful began to happen. He heard his real thoughts, felt emotions that had been buried for years, started asking the questions that actually mattered. What do I really want? Who am I when I'm not producing? What kind of life do I want to return to? That was the beginning of his healing. Not a new job, not a new goal, but a pause. When we slow down, we don't just rest. We start to hear what we've been missing. Adrian had never noticed the way sunlight fell across his kitchen counter in the morning, or how his breath softened when he sat beside a tree, or how his body exhaled when no one needed anything from him. In the noise of busyness, he had become numb, disconnected from joy, from intuition, from the small signals of his own soul. But in the stillness, he realized something that changed everything. The answers I've been chasing were whispering all along, but I was too loud to hear them. Stillness is not empty. It is full of guidance, clarity, direction, the kind that doesn't come from effort. but from awareness. There is a kind of exhaustion that sleep doesn't cure. It's the fatigue of pretending, of pushing through emotional pain, of performing productivity when your heart is quietly breaking. Adrian thought he needed a break. What he really needed was to come home to himself. He spent afternoons walking without a destination. He read books slowly, not to finish them, but to feel them. He started journaling again, letting the ink hold the grief he'd been carrying for years. And one day, he wrote the sentence that changed everything. "I've spent my whole life trying to become something. Maybe now I just want to be." That moment of truth didn't make everything easy, but it did make things honest. And from honesty, healing began. One of the greatest reasons we resist stillness is fear. Fear of falling behind, fear of being forgotten. Fear that if we stop, even for a moment, we'll lose everything we've built. Adrian felt it deeply. If I slow down now, will someone else pass me by? Will people think I've lost my edge? Will I still be enough if I'm not always achieving something? But here's the truth he discovered during his months of quiet. The pace that's burning you out was never sustainable to begin with. And the people who love you for your output never really knew you. He began to notice something strange. The more present he became, the more effective he was. The less rushed he felt, the more creative he became. The slower he lived, the more alive he felt. Stillness didn't make him less, it made him whole. Adrian used to mistake stillness for stagnation. He thought rest was weakness. That slowing down meant he wasn't trying hard enough. But nature tells a different story. Winter is still. Seeds rest underground. Trees appear lifeless, yet deep beneath the surface, they're preparing for spring. Stillness isn't failure, it's fertility. It's the sacred space where transformation begins. Everything meaningful in my life, Adrian said, was born out of silence. Not noise, not chaos, not hustle. We don't need to push harder, we need to listen deeper. Stillness isn't something that just happens. It must be chosen, protected, honored. Adrian began to design his days differently. He stopped booking back-to-back meetings. He blocked out time in his calendar labeled only "do nothing." He let go of the guilt when he rested, realizing that peace wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. Instead of rushing into his mornings, he greeted the day slowly with intention, a deep breath, a warm cup of tea, a quiet moment to place his hand over his heart and say, "I'm allowed to start from calm." He built sacred space not in monasteries or retreats, but in his living room, his walks, his moments of mindful presence. Stillness, he learned, is not a place, it's a practice. In stillness, we stop trying to fix everything. We stop trying to rush healing, to outpace grief, to manufacture joy. Instead, we make room for feeling, room for truth, room for becoming. Adrian didn't change overnight, but slowly, gently, his life began to breathe again. He laughed more freely, cried more honestly, loved more openly, because stillness gave him something achievement never could. A relationship with his own soul. And once you touch that inner quiet, once you realize how deeply you've missed yourself, you never want to go back to the noise. We live in a world that asks us to go faster. But your healing may be asking you to go slower. Stillness is not a weakness. It is a form of strength the world doesn't always understand. When you pause, you don't fall behind. You realign with what matters, with who you are, with the life that's been waiting for you to stop long enough to finally feel it. So take the risk. Unplug, breathe, sit still, because the most powerful breakthroughs often arrive in the moments we stop chasing them. His name was Elias. To the outside world, he looked like he had it all together. Successful business, a loving partner, friends who laughed at his jokes, a calm face in crowded rooms. But what no one saw, what he never told anyone, was how every night felt like a storm inside his chest. A thunder of self-doubt, waves of shame, lightning strikes of fear that no one else seemed to carry. What if I lose everything? What if I'm just pretending? What if they find out I'm not as strong as they think? We all have storms. Some are loud, panic attacks, breakdowns, crisis. Some are quiet, numbness, fatigue going through the motions. But all storms have one thing in common. They ask us, who will you be in the middle of this? The world teaches us to perform strength. Toughen up, don't cry, power through, be a rock. But true strength doesn't look like armor, it looks like presence. It's the voice inside that whispers, I'm scared and I'm still here. I don't know the way forward, but I won't give up on myself. I'm breaking, but I refuse to abandon my heart. Elias didn't need to shout to be brave. He needed to sit still long enough to feel. And not runs. That's the real warrior. Not the one who conquers others, but the one who faces himself and stays. It didn't happen all at once. The unraveling began slowly for Elias. A missed deadline here. A fight with his partner there. A creeping fog of burnout that wouldn't lift. And when the storm hit hardest, a business deal fell through. A friend betrayed his trust, and his partner left saying, You're here, but I can never feel you. Everything cracked open. But here's what Elias discovered. You can't control the storm. You can control who you are inside it. When his world was falling apart, he did something radical. He stopped trying to fix it. He didn't numb, didn't escape, didn't lash out. Instead, he sat down one morning on his bedroom floor, placed his hand on his heart, and whispered, I'm still here. That's warrior energy. Not the fight, not the force, but the faith to stay present when it hurts. We've been taught that courage means feeling fearless. But the truth? Courage is what you do when you're terrified. It's what you choose when everything feels uncertain. It's how you show up when your voice shakes and your heart breaks. Elias began to rebuild his life, not from confidence, but from compassion. He didn't push himself back into the grind. He didn't create a perfect plan. Instead, he asked himself every morning, what does it mean to love myself through this? Some days that meant journaling. Some days it meant crying. Some days it meant laughing at the absurdity of it all. And slowly, storm by storm, he discovered that the warrior mind isn't about dominating life. It's about dancing with it, no matter how unpredictable the music becomes. Emotional strength isn't born in comfort. It's forged in the quiet decisions you make when no one's watching. Elias didn't wake up one day with clarity. It came piece by piece, through daily practices that felt small, but shaped everything. He started to breathe before reacting. He created space to feel, not just function. He learned to say, I'm overwhelmed without shame, and perhaps hardest of all, he allowed others to see his vulnerability without apology. That was the discipline, not perfection, but honesty. It's easy to fake calm. But a warrior trains in the art of truthful stillness, when your nervous system is on fire, when your heart is pounding, when every part of you wants to escape, and you choose to stay. Breathe. Soften. That's power. Elias once believed that being unshakable meant nothing could hurt him. But true unshakability comes from knowing, even if everything crumbles around me, I know how to return to myself. It's not that the storms stop. It's that your roots grow deeper. You stop chasing external validation. You stop waiting for the world to give you permission to feel safe. You realize you were born with the compass. You just needed stillness to remember where it pointed. Elias began to walk differently. He didn't rush. He didn't armor up. He didn't need to prove anything, because peace had become his choice, not a reward for productivity. The greatest victories are the ones no one sees. The morning you wake up with dread and still make your bed. The moment you say no to something that drains you. The night you sit with your sadness instead of numbing it. The breath you take before reacting in anger. The forgiveness you offer yourself when the day doesn't go as planned. These are warrior moments. No applause, no spotlight, just you and your choice to stay kind, stay grounded, stay you. Elias began to collect these quiet wins. He didn't need medals anymore. Every time he stayed steady when life swayed. He whispered inside, that was strength, that was love, that was enough. Let's be clear, even with all his growth, Elias still faced storms. Life didn't suddenly become easy, but the difference. He stopped running from the rain. He learned to dance in it, to listen to it, to let it cleanse him, and each storm revealed something new. That pain is not the enemy, resistance is. That softness isn't weakness, it's wisdom. That your mind can be your greatest ally. When you stop asking it to protect you with fear and start inviting it to guide you with truth, you don't need to hide your battles to be strong. You don't need to have it all together to be worthy. You don't need to rush healing to be doing it right. The warrior mind isn't hard, it's honest. It's not rigid, it's resilient. It's not about conquering, but staying rooted. Even when the winds howl and the ground shakes, you can be scared and still be steady. You can be grieving and still move with grace. You can be uncertain and still show up with heart. That's what makes you unshakable, not your ability to avoid storms, but your willingness to be present within them. And when you choose that kind of presence, you become a quiet force, not loud, not perfect, but undeniably powerful. You become the calm. Part 8, the liberation of awareness, how to stop carrying what was never yours. Avery had always carried more than her share. Even as a child, she bore the moods of the room. If her father was angry, she felt responsible. If her mother was anxious, she tried to be the peacekeeper. If her friends were hurting, she made herself smaller so they could breathe easier. No one told her she had to, but somehow she learned. She learned to scan every room for tension. She learned to listen for unsaid pain. She learned to anticipate everyone's needs except her own. And over time, that became her identity, the strong one, the healer, the responsible one. But behind her quiet smile was a deep exhaustion, not from doing too much, but from carrying what was never hers to carry. When you spend your life attuned to everyone else's pain, you slowly forget the sound of your own truth. Avery didn't notice it at first. It was subtle, laughing when something wasn't funny, nodding when she wanted to say no, apologizing for simply having needs, carrying guilt for resting, joy, and even success. She became a mirror for other people's emotions, but stopped recognizing her own reflection. And this is what happens to so many of us. We become so skilled at absorbing other people's energy. We forget how to distinguish our responsibility from their projections. This is how the weight accumulates, piece by piece, comment by comment, expectation by expectation, until one day you look in the mirror and wonder, whose life am I living? The moment of awakening rarely comes as a thunderclap. For Avery, it came in the grocery store. She was standing in the produce aisle, arguing silently with herself about which apples to buy. Not because she didn't know what she wanted, but because she was calculating which choice would make someone else happy. And suddenly, she laughed out loud, because in that tiny, absurd moment, she saw just how far she'd wandered from herself. And that was the crack in the wall, the first glimpse of truth, awareness. This is not my weight to carry. I can't keep editing myself to manage the comfort of others. I've made a habit of abandoning myself, and I'm ready to stop. That was the beginning. When Avery got home that evening, she did something she hadn't done in years. She sat at her kitchen table, opened her journal, and wrote at the top of the page, things I'm carrying that aren't mine. And slowly, one by one, she named them: my mother's fear of not being enough, my friend's disappointment about her own choices, my boss's anger that has nothing to do with me, my partner's anxiety that I've been trying to fix. It felt like bleeding truth onto paper. Every sentence was a small revolt against the pattern. Every name was a step back into her own skin. Because you can't let go of what you won't admit you're holding. Awareness is powerful, but boundaries make it real. Avery began practicing a simple mantra. Every time a situation tempted her to absorb what wasn't hers: that's not mine. It was awkward at first, when a coworker vented at her for 20 minutes. She no longer rushed to solve it. When her partner grew distant and moody, she didn't immediately assume she'd done something wrong. When her family pushed her to be the peacekeeper, she quietly stepped back and let silence do the work. And to her surprise, the world didn't fall apart. In fact, her world finally started to take shape. What no one tells you is, there's grief in letting go of what was never yours. Avery didn't expect that. She thought release would feel light and easy. But instead, she felt waves of sadness, not because she missed the weight, but because she realized how long she had confused burden with belonging. She had mistaken her usefulness for her worth, her exhaustion for her strength. So when she stopped carrying what wasn't hers, she had to face what was underneath: the ache of her own neglected self, the dreams she'd shelved, the voice she had silenced. But grief, she discovered, was not her enemy. It was a form of love. For the self she had left behind, freedom didn't come all at once. It arrived in moments: a deep exhale after setting a boundary, a quiet joy in choosing rest, a newfound laugh that felt unfiltered. Avery began to walk differently. She stood taller, spoke slower, said no without explanation, and people noticed. Some grew uncomfortable, because they were used to the version of her that always made space. But that wasn't her burden either. You don't owe anyone the version of yourself that kept you small. You owe yourself truth. And the truth is, you can still love others deeply, without disappearing to do it. The most beautiful part of liberation is not that you fly away, but that you come home. Avery didn't become someone new. She remembered who she was before the world asked her to be everything else. She no longer flinched at silence. She no longer apologized for joy. She no longer carried shame disguised as kindness. She became spacious, open, rooted in her own enoughness, and she made a vow: not to save the world, but to stop betraying herself for the comfort of others. That was the truest kind of healing. Not loud, not dramatic, but profoundly honest. Every time you release what was never yours to carry, you create space for what was always yours to receive: peace, joy, self-respect, ease, truth. You don't have to be everything for everyone. You don't have to hold what breaks you just to prove your love. Let this be your quiet revolution to live light, to love without losing yourself, to stop carrying and start being. Because your soul was never meant to be a storage unit for other people's pain. It was meant to be a sanctuary for your truth. What no one tells you is, there's grief in letting go of what was never yours. Avery didn't expect that. She thought release would feel light and easy, but instead she felt waves of sadness, not because she missed the weight, but because she realized how long she had confused burden with belonging. She had mistaken her usefulness for her worth, her exhaustion for her strength. So when she stopped carrying what wasn't hers, she had to face what was underneath: the ache of her own neglected self, the dreams she'd shelved, the voice she had silenced. But grief, she discovered, was not her enemy. It was a form of love. For the self she had left behind, freedom didn't come all at once. It arrived in moments: a deep exhale after setting a boundary, a quiet joy in choosing rest, A newfound laugh that felt unfiltered. Avery began to walk differently. She stood taller, spoke slower, said no without explanation, and people noticed. Some grew uncomfortable because they were used to the version of her that always made space. But that wasn't her burden either. You don't owe anyone the version of yourself that kept you small. You owe yourself truth. And the truth is, you can still love others deeply, without disappearing to do it. The most beautiful part of liberation is not that you fly away, but that you come home. Avery didn't become someone new. She remembered who she was before the world asked her to be everything else. She no longer flinched at silence. She no longer apologized for joy. She no longer carried shame disguised as kindness. She became spacious, open, rooted in her own enoughness, and she made a vow, not to save the world, but to stop betraying herself for the comfort of others. That was the truest kind of healing. Not loud, not dramatic, but profoundly honest. Every time you release what was never yours to carry, you create space for what was always yours to receive. Peace, joy, self-respect, ease, truth. You don't have to be everything for everyone. You don't have to hold what breaks you just to prove your love. Let this be your quiet revolution to live light, to love without losing yourself, to stop carrying and start being. Because your soul was never meant to be a storage unit for other people's pain. It was meant to be a sanctuary for your truth. Maya stood in front of the mirror, not to check her appearance, but to face the story she kept repeating. I'm too late, I always mess it up. No one ever stays. Maybe I'm just hard to love. She didn't say these things out loud, but they lived beneath every decision, every hesitation, every moment she chose silence over self-expression. And maybe you know what that's like. To be haunted not by ghosts, but by your own beliefs. The stories we tell ourselves don't begin in adulthood. They start in the soft, impressionable years. In quiet moments that seemed too small to matter. The teacher who raised an eyebrow when you spoke. The parent who only praised perfection. The friend who laughed when you shared something vulnerable. The moment someone left without explaining why. These moments became conclusions. I talk too much. I have to earn love. I'm not good enough. I'm forgettable, and without knowing it, you began to write your identity around those conclusions. Maya didn't remember the first time she told herself she was too much, but she remembered shrinking ever since. Here's the painful truth. We don't just tell stories, we live them. Maya always fell into relationships where she overgave and underreceived. She over-explained, over-apologized, overanalyzed. Because deep down, she believed she had to earn her place. And that belief shaped her world. When you believe you are unworthy, you unconsciously choose people and places that affirm it. It's not weakness, it's programming. The brain doesn't seek truth, it seeks familiarity. It wants to feel right, even if that rightness keeps you small and suffering. But here's the miracle: if you wrote the story, you can rewrite it. The shift in Maya began not with some big spiritual awakening, but with a single question. What if that story isn't true? She didn't answer it right away. She didn't have to, because asking the question was the awakening. From that moment on, every time her inner critic whispered, "You're not enough," she paused, took a breath, placed a hand on her heart, and gently asked, "Whose voice is that? Is that mine or something I picked up and mistook as truth?" It wasn't about silencing the voice. It was about creating space between the voice and her identity. That space is where freedom begins. Maya didn't become someone else. She became honest. She realized that "I'm too late" was a lie born from comparison, that "I always mess up" was perfectionism in disguise. That "no one ever stays" came from people who couldn't love her fully. Not because she was unlovable, but because they were unavailable. So she began rewriting. I am right on time for my own path. Mistakes are how I learn and grow. I attract people who see and celebrate the real me. I am enough, even when I rest, even when I don't perform. She didn't chant affirmations in the mirror. She embodied new truth, slowly, imperfectly, bravely. Lena had walked miles. Through cities, jobs, heartbreaks, awakenings, always reaching, always searching. She tried to find peace in books, in meditation, in mentors and milestones, in doing more, in being better. But the more she searched, the more a quiet voice inside began to whisper, what if you're not lost? What if you were never broken? What if everything you've been seeking is already inside you? That whisper became a knowing, and that knowing brought her home. We live in a world that tells us we're not enough, not until we heal more, achieve more, forgive more, do more. But Lena learned what many of us forget. You don't become worthy, you remember that you are. She realized growth wasn't about turning into someone else. It was about taking off the layers that never belonged to her to begin with, the masks, the people-pleasing, the shame, the stories, and beneath it all was someone soft, powerful, whole. Someone who had always been waiting for her to return. There was no fanfare when Lena came home to herself. No breakthrough moment, no viral quote, no perfect sunrise, just a soft breath, a quiet morning, a feeling of finally belonging in her own skin. She didn't need a new plan, she needed presence. She didn't need to impress the world, she needed to trust her inner world. And that trust gave her everything she'd been chasing, peace, clarity. Freedom, coming home, doesn't mean arriving somewhere new. It means falling back in love with what's always been here. Your breath, your body, your boundaries, your joy, your truth. Lena stopped measuring her worth by how much she accomplished. She began measuring it by how deeply she lived, how gently she spoke to herself, how bravely she showed up even when she was scared. And every time she chose herself, it echoed in her life, in her relationships, in her choices, in her smile. This story began with a search for meaning, for certainty, for strength, for peace. But what it revealed was this: you don't have to go far, you don't have to fight harder, you don't have to earn your own belonging. You are already enough. You are already whole. Everything you need is within you, and has been waiting patiently for you to remember. So return to your heart, to your stillness, to your truth. Because the most sacred journey you'll ever take is the one that leads you back to yourself. Welcome home. Epilogue, the quiet return, a final reflection on coming home to yourself. Lena didn't expect the journey to end this way. Not with fireworks, not with a perfect plan, not with applause, but with a quiet sunrise, a still room, a warm cup of tea resting between her palms as her breath slowed and her heart whispered, I'm okay now, I'm home. This is where we arrive, not just with Lena, but with all of them. With Adrian, who learned that stillness wasn't laziness, but a return to life itself. With Avery, who laid down the invisible weight of being responsible for everyone's emotions. With Elias, who sat in the center of his storm and discovered that true strength doesn't roar, it stays. With Maya, who edited the stories that were never hers and began telling the truth gently from her scars. And with Lena, who discovered that she had always been enough, even in the silence, even in the waiting. Together, they were never chasing transformation. They were unlearning shame, softening control, shedding the lies they wore as protection, and remembering the simple, revolutionary truth: we are already whole. The journey was not linear, it was sacred. At times it felt like breaking. Other times it felt like nothing at all, like stillness so quiet it scared them. But healing isn't a straight line. It's a spiral. It doubles back. It pauses. It forgets. And yet every moment of awareness, every time they chose to stay present instead of run, was progress. When Adrian chose a slower morning over another rushed success. When Avery said no and didn't apologize for it. When Elias cried and didn't armor up afterward. When Maya didn't shrink to make others more comfortable. When Lena stopped searching and started listening. That was it. That was the path home. The deepest healing comes from remembrance, not reinvention. If there's one thread that ties each story together, it's this. Healing isn't about turning into someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. Before shame, before masks, before performance. All of them, each character, each moment was an invitation to return. Return to softness, to stillness, to truth. To breath, to heart. They didn't have to change to become lovable. They had to remember that they already were. These characters are all of us. The truth is, these aren't just stories of fictional souls. They are mirrors. Maybe you're Adrian, driven, exhausted, wondering why you're still not fulfilled. Maybe you're Avery, empathic, generous, stretched thin from carrying too much. Maybe you're Elias, wearing quiet grief under the mask of composure. Maybe you're Maya, living inside a story that's too small for your spirit. Maybe you're Lena, on a search you can't name, longing for something that doesn't live out there. Or maybe you're all of them. Because the human experience is layered, messy, overlapping, and beautiful in its complexity. We are not here to become someone else. We are here to finally stand in the full truth of who we are and stay. The lesson. Coming home is an act of daily courage. What does it mean to come home to yourself? It means saying yes to your own peace, even when others misunderstand. Saying no to roles that shrink you, even when you're used to playing them. Choosing softness instead of defensiveness. Allowing slowness, silence, and space to be sacred. Creating boundaries not as a wall, but as a way to love yourself better. Questioning the stories that tell you you're unworthy. Choosing presence over perfection. Feeling deeply and not apologizing for it. Resting not because you earned it, but because you deserve it. Living not to impress, but to express. Trusting that the path inward is the only one that ever mattered. It is the daily decision to return to your center, even when it feels unfamiliar, even when it's not celebrated, even when no one else sees the effort it takes, because you see it, and you are worth that return. Start small. Start by noticing the voices in your head that aren't kind and question them. Ask yourself, is this story serving me? If not, write a new one. Make time for stillness, not to produce or improve, but just to be. The world will push you to go faster. Let that be your reminder to go slower. Let go of what you were never meant to carry, especially the guilt for choosing yourself. It's not selfish, it's sacred. Forgive yourself often. Speak to yourself like someone you love. Listen more, apologize less for being human, feel fully, rest deeply, love fiercely, and most importantly, don't wait for the storm to pass before choosing peace. Bring peace with you into the storm. That is how you return. That is how you live. That is how you lead yourself home. If this story moved you, if you saw yourself in these words, if something quiet inside you stirred and whispered, yes, this is me, then this journey is also yours. And it doesn't end here. There are more stories to tell, more wounds to heal, more joy to reclaim, more breath to come back to. This space, this channel was built for that. For you. For the brave ones who are learning to live more gently, more fully, more truthfully. So if this story resonated with your soul, if it helped you remember even a small part of who you are, please subscribe to the channel. It's not just a click, it's a quiet revolution. Your support gives us the encouragement and energy to create more content that speaks not just to your mind, but to your heart. We promise to keep showing up with honesty, soul, and softness, because we're not just building a channel, we're creating a community of returners, people coming home to themselves together. Thank you for walking this path, for trusting this story, for choosing yourself. Your journey is sacred, and we're honored to walk beside you. Subscribe, share, come back soon. The next story is already waiting.